Hey everybody, Mr. Wedge here. I'm going to be going over some of the things that we kind of wrapped up with before spring break, and it's been weeks now since you have been studying North Africa and the Middle East. So I want to make sure we have some review before we move into our next activity, which is going to be a book study. Actually, one of my favorite parts of eighth grade social studies, and a lot of my former students come back and tell me that they love that book. So I think you're going to enjoy it, but before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about what we have learned so far. We did our Golden Globe, and you are all pretty much aware of the countries within this region. So just to kind of recap, the region that we're studying is really two parts. It's the northern part of Africa, and then it's the other part is the Middle East, which is sometimes called Southwest Asia. So list of countries there that you guys know of, and then there's a couple of them that aren't really countries, like for example, Western Sahara is more of a territory. And then the Palestinian territory is where Israel is located, and that one is kind of disputed. Some countries recognize it as a country, other ones don't. But those are the nations that we spend a lot of time on, especially the ones in North Africa. We spend a lot of time on the Arab Spring. Most of the nations on this right side here had some kind of revolution, right? And about 10 years ago, some of them were more successful than the other ones, especially in Tunisia. And even Tunisia's had some issues getting a democracy. But we spent some time talking about Egypt, and Egypt overthrew their leader that was in power for about 30 years, had some elections, and a lot of violence and a lot of horrible things have kind of gone on in Egypt since then. So Arab Spring was the last big part of our unit that we talked about. And these countries, of course, like I said, you have studied already. Why do we study North Africa and the Middle East together? Well, the reason is that they're culturally pretty similar. I'm going to ask that since this is a video, that you pause the video for about 5 seconds and see if you can answer this question. Thinking back about a month ago, what are two of the cultural characteristics that bind these people together? What are the two things that really keep the culture similar? What two things are very similar within North Africa and the Middle East? See if you can remember that for a second. All right, well, if you got it, it is the ethnic group of Arabic, the language, right? And also Islam is the religion of the region. Those are the two culturally significant pieces here. A lot of the countries in this region have the same religion and the same language. So those two things together are actually kind of what's known as an ethnic identity. It's the thing that identifies the people of a certain region. And there's some differences that we haven't talked much about that I think are important before we get into that book I was telling you about. And that's the difference between ethnicity and race. And then also another word that you might have heard of before is your nationality. So here's some basic definitions I want you to be aware of. Ethnicity, think of that as kind of like your culture. We did the culture box earlier this school year where you had to come up with some cultural pieces for you. That might be your religion, it might be your foods that you eat, maybe it's the language that you speak, maybe it's your religion. It's kind of the things that make you who you are and your culture. It could include your race too, but not always. And race is kind of different. Race is really just your physical traits. It's the DNA, including your skin color, maybe your facial features, that kind of thing. That's your race, your hairstyle, your hair color. Those are things that are determined by your race. And like I said, race is sometimes included in ethnicity, but not always. So a lot of the times you might be racially identifying as black or white or Pacific Islander or Native American. Those are all physical traits that people identify with. Whereas ethnicity, I'm German American, so my ethnic traits in my culture, I'm German, I'm English, right? Those aren't races. I would consider myself to be white, but my ethnic groups, I would say I'm more in line with German and English. So those are the little bit of differences there. And then that last word, this is a new one for you, nationality. That's kind of the country that you have a strong tie to. So for the most part, for us, it's probably going to be the United States, right? That's kind of the place that you're going to be tied to, but not always. Maybe it's Mexico. Maybe it's a place that your family's from. Maybe it's a country that you want to move to, and you have a lot of things that you like about it. So nationalities can change over time, whereas your race is kind of stuck where it is, and even your ethnicity can change over time as well if you identify with something different. But take a look at the map here. We did mention this ethnic group. The group on the map here is called the Kurds. The Kurds are an ethnic group. They are a group of people that have a shared cultural identity, and they're found over four countries in the Middle East. You can find the Kurds in the eastern part of Turkey, northern Syria, northern Iraq, and then western Iran. But they don't have their own country, whereas the Iranians, they are ethnically kind of known as the Persians. They have their own nation for the most part. So that's a little bit different there. And the reason we're talking about this is that unfortunately, because people have different ethnic groups, a lot of times that creates tension and conflict. And that's something that is going to be very important for us to know when we talk about this book that we're going to be reading. Ethnic conflict is anytime there's violence or political bickering between two or more ethnicities. And the example that I have in the map here, you'll recognize this little part here on the top right. That's the map of Europe for today. There are about 6 different countries in the region of like southeastern Europe, Slovenia, Croatia, Bosnia, right, Serbia, all these different small little countries. That actually wasn't the way it used to be on the left here in 1991 when I was a little baby boy pooping my pants, right? There was only one country over here, and it was called Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia was a massive country filled with a bunch of different ethnic groups. And even though they might have looked similar in physical appearance, they were pretty different people. There were a lot of different languages spoken there, different religions, different cultural practices. And because of those differences, war and other issues kind of sprouted up in the 1990s. And that's why today there are about 6 different countries in that region. And unfortunately, one of the things that happened is this thing called ethnic cleansing. And that is where a certain ethnic group does in fact try to kill another ethnic group, which is of course not good, not a good decision to make. So that happens over the course of history, and that's going to be the case study and the focus of our region we're moving into. Here it is. We're going to be talking about Sudan. Sudan is a country that is right on the border of the Sahara Desert in Africa. It kind of is the country that is sometimes lumped into North Africa. We did not lump it into our region for this part. We're going to push this country into the sub-Saharan Africa countries for this part. But this is a map showing you South Sudan. And what you'll notice by looking at your legend is that South Sudan has about 7 ethnic groups. And they are all fairly locked out from the rest of each other by geography. As you can tell, they're all kind of on the map about in the same area. But what it's showing you, as you can probably tell, is that these groups of people are living separate from each other, and they're probably living different lives. They probably have different religions, they probably have different ways of doing things, and they have chosen to separate themselves by their differences. So I'd like you to also pause the video here for a second and try to see if you can answer this question. Do you see any potential problems with the way that the ethnic groups of South Sudan are organized? Where they're located on this map, do you see any possible problems here? I want you to make a couple of predictions on your own. That's going to bring us into the topic of a book we're going to be reading. And it's really about the Sudanese Civil War. And that's been sort of something that's been going on for the last 70 years, on and off. And the war itself has really 3 main problems, 3 main issues. Is that the national government of South Sudan, or Sudan, has been trying to control each of these ethnic groups, and a lot of times ethnic groups don't want to be controlled. They want to have their own say in what they do as a country or as a people, and the national government has been very, very violent towards certain groups. And the 2 main ones that you're going to see in the book are the Dinka, which is up here, and then the Nuer. And the Dinka and Nuer are going to have ethnic conflict throughout the region, and a lot of that has to do with number 2 over here, is that some of these groups have different religions, and the religions are trying to spread their influence across the region. Islam is going to be found in the northern parts of Sudan, which makes sense because it's closer to the other countries that practice Islam, whereas southern Sudan is going to be primarily Christian. And that has to do with European countries that had controlled Sudan, like the French and the English and the German. All these different European powers had controlled parts of Africa up until the 1900s, and they're going to leave Christianity as kind of the other religion. And then number 3, this is going to be the biggest part of the book that we're going to read, and it has to do with access to natural resources, especially water. The book is called A Long Walk to Water, so the focus of the book really is all about having access to water, and it's called A Long Walk to Water. So now that we've kind of got that background there and review, you're going to be able to find this book on Schoology. There's a digital version for you. It's a PDF. You can download it to your Chromebook, or if you have access to the internet, you can just click on the link in Schoology and you can read it offline. Every other day, you're going to see an assignment post in Schoology, and you're going to be required to read a chapter and then answer some questions and submit them to Schoology. I will also be recording myself reading some books if you want to be read too. Or the very last thing I'll put on here, this is going to be on Schoology too, this slideshow. There's a link on YouTube. There's audio versions of the book as well. So if you don't want to listen to my voice, it's okay. If you don't want to, you can listen to somebody else read the book. That's no problem. And then I also will be recording some summaries of kind of what we read, and I'll try to go on to Schoology and post so that you can ask some questions and have some questions being answered. And that's going to be kind of the way we're going to read this book. It does take about 2 weeks of our class online to do so, so that'll take up most of our time the next couple of weeks. If you have other questions about anything that we talked about in the slideshow, please make sure you send me an email or a message on Schoology, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. Have a good day.